Good evening, everyone. Sorry about that. A few minutes late, having some technical difficulties. Hold on a second here. Hopefully that's better. All right, we'll see how that looks. How's that look? That look better? All right. Good evening, everyone. This is Jeff, Astro Scoop Astrology. This is my weekly live stream. It is Friday, May 30th, 2025, the last Friday in May, and it is 8:37 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So my weekly live streams are always here on Fridays on YouTube, either 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. And last week was 8:30, and I may change it to 9. So keep up with me on my socials. I'm on X, Astro_Scoop, Instagram, AstroScoop7, and of course here on YouTube, AstroScoop3801. So keep up with me, and most likely I will be changing that time to 9, and sometimes it's on Saturdays. Goes back and forth. So with the summer, I'll probably be changing those up. But let's see if there's anyone here tonight. We're going to wait a few minutes, see if anyone comes in. All right, doesn't look like anyone's here yet. All right. So you can check out my live stream from last week where I talked about pure Gemini energy, just the first decan of Gemini coming off the Taurus Gemini cusp. And that is the pure Gemini energy. And when I say pure, it is the most sharp Gemini energy because it's all Mercury. So people born last week up until the 2nd of June, which we're still in, so we're technically still in Gemini 1, is ruled by Mercury and co-ruled by Mercury. So they're double Mercury people. And I talked about their strong need for freedom. And of course, with Gemini, we know there's always a very strong need for mental activity, and there's mental acuity and a lot of talent there. Anywhere there's Gemini in the chart, in the natal or birth chart, there is always a strong potential to learn and absorb information very quickly, and possibly even at lightning speed. So that's something with Gemini that is usually very common. So tonight we're going to talk about Gemini 2, the Gemini 2 decan, which is Gemini folks are ruled by Mercury, but Gemini 2 people have a co-ruler of Venus. So it's Mercury plus Venus, and the week is coming up. It's June 3rd to June 10th or 11th, depending on the degrees. Now, when you have a Gemini planet, if you are a Gemini or you have the moon or you have rising, every planet, every sign you have in your chart is placed somewhere and it has a degree. So it's more important to know the degree of the sign rather than just to know the sign. So it's kind of like saying, if all the Geminis you know are the same, whether someone is the first day of Gemini coming off of Taurus, which would be on the cusp, or the last day of Gemini, which we'll talk about next month, which is going towards the Gemini, towards the Cancer cusp. The last day of Gemini would be Gemini Cancer cusp, almost the next sign, which is water. So that is wildly different. So that's why it's really, really good to to have your birth time, your location, your time zone, everything, have all your ducks in a row, and be able to smooth that out so that you can have your accurate natal birth chart and get all the planets, the houses, and everything, and have the correct degrees, because then the astrologer, myself or someone else, can help you decode the nuances and kind of the subtle clues that are in your birth chart. And they really are there. And that's one thing I notice a lot of astrologers around the world that are on YouTube focus on event charts, like a tragedy, a shooting, wars around the world. And those are very interesting. And those are very much needed. But we've kind of got, I noticed we've kind of gotten away from the lost art of looking at the natal birth chart, which astrologers did very much in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Very, very good place to start. And I was reading a couple astrology books this week, and one of the books stated that no matter how complicated you get with your techniques in astrology, whether it's math, the angles, midpoints, all kinds of complicated things, that you really need to get down the basics of astrology, no matter what system you're using, whether you're using Eastern astrology, Western astrology, Vedic, sidereal. You really just need to get the basics down and get very comfortable with the basics. I think from both a intuitive point of view and a logical point of view. So a logical, systematic kind of point of view where you learn things step by step, not too rigid, but get that groundwork of the basics, and then start to build on that, and then use other tools in addition to your thought and your logic, using intuition, sensing, feelings. That's another lost art as well, is when we're dealing with people in all kinds of situations. We forget that we're always thinking with our heads, and we're always thinking about our feelings, and sometimes forgetting what's actually happening or what we're feeling, sort of thing. So that's where astrology can really help the person, and where astrology can really benefit the person, can really benefit from their natal or birth chart, to see things that they can uncover, some things that are obvious, and then some things in the chart that are more hidden or dormant, that someone can bring to your attention, so that you can develop that. So that's definitely a fun thing, and I love doing natal birth charts. Probably my favorite thing. I've never tired of it. Learned how to do them when I was young, and on and off have just looked up probably thousands of charts of reading people I've read, family, friends, coworkers, acquaintances, and of course tons and tons of celebrities, of which a lot I talk about on this channel and in my videos. And speaking of my videos, please check out my playlists here on YouTube. I have a playlist for everything for astrology. It should be very easy to find something. So if you're a Gemini, you can look up my air sign playlist. And you can also look up Gemini videos. Those should be organized. But if you're a fellow air sign, if you're Aquarius or Libra, you can look up Aquarius. You can look up the air sign, like I mentioned. And then you can find things easily. And I try to collate the videos that way. And then if you subscribe, happy Friday. Yes, okay, we have somebody in here. That's great. If you subscribe, sign in using your Google or YouTube account. Please click subscribe to AstroScoop 3801, and then click personalized or all. And then you'll get notifications of my videos and live streams, and you'll either get all the notifications or it will personalize your notifications based on what you've watched on my channel and will give you suggestions. I like the personalized a lot. I use that with a lot of people that I subscribe to, because there's some astrologers I watch regularly, maybe on a monthly basis, which I hope you watch me at least monthly. And then there's other astrologers I might come back to every 3 or 4 times a year, twice a year. And I like the personalized because I don't get notified of every single video, especially some of the people that do 3 or 4 a week. So that sort of thing. So please subscribe and like, comment, and share. It really helps the channel. I am growing. We're over 1,000 subscribers now, which is great, but we have to keep growing, and I want to really grow that in the summer. And we're a month away from the solstice, so we're really, really close to strong summer energy. And I'm looking over here, and the sunset continues to get later here on the East Coast, and it's been closer to even 8:30 of it becoming completely dark. So it's only been a few minutes. So it's a wonderful feeling of really, really long stretch during the day into the evening of light. But it's been very chilly here on this coast. It's been unusually chilly, which is kind of nice though, because in a week or two it's going to start getting into the 70s, and then it will hit 80 shortly after that, and then we'll get the humidity, as most of the country will get that humidity, and then it's June, July, August, and part of September, at least here, of that hot weather you can't escape. So it's a good balance that we have right now. So I'm just waiting. I'm just dragging a little bit, waiting to see if anyone else shows up. I was having a little technical difficulties before, if you were looking for me, because I'm doing this on a different browser. This is a different stream, and I'm sending it to YouTube, whereas sometimes I'm actually physically on YouTube and I'm doing the stream there. So it's the same. It shows up similar, but I'm just in a different place in my computer. I'm not actually on YouTube, but I'm sending it to YouTube. So hopefully everything is clear. I know last week it looks better tonight. This lighting looks better to me. Last week it looked a little washed out, but this looks pretty clear to me, which is good. So happy Friday, yes. And of course it's almost June. So we're still in early Gemini tonight, which is May 30th. And then starting on next week on June 3rd to the 10th, we'll have Gemini 2, Mercury ruled Geminis, with a hint or flavor of Venus. And I was hoping that we get some viewers tonight, maybe that are either born this week or next week, hopefully, to get some Gemini conversations going. There is one person that we know is a Gemini, and we'll see if they come in at some point. But okay, so again, the live streams, for those of you that came in late, Fridays or Saturdays at 8 or 9. Tonight was 8:30, and last week was 8:30. But basically 8 or 9 p.m. on Fridays, possibly Saturdays in the summer. But just keep up with me on X and Instagram. Those are the two main places that I do posts, and I always do posts about the live streams there. So Gemini 2. How does a Gemini 2 person born June 3rd to the 10th differ from the folks we talked about last week, or that we're in right now, a pure Gemini person? Well, the Gemini 1 person that we talked about last week, like I mentioned, is all Mercury. So it's a Mercury ruled sign, and then the decan, the early degrees, up till about 10 or 11, is also co-ruled by Mercury. So you're talking about very strong mercurial Gemini traits and characteristics. When we come into next week and we have Gemini 2. We have a little bit of a more mature Gemini. And now we have the co-ruler is Venus or Libra, and in addition to having that Mercury. So the really interesting thing about people born this week, June 3rd to the 10th, I have not known, and I do not know a lot of people born this week. This is one of those other kind of oddball weeks for me throughout the year, where I cannot think off the top of my head of family or friends or coworkers that I've had that are born this week. And I can think of a couple people when I was younger, but not many. So if anyone comes in and you are born between June 3rd and the 10th, or you know someone who is, feel free to mention and see if let me know if any of this resonates with you or for the person that you know. Because again, I have not known many Geminis born Gemini 2s for some reason. And that always makes me wonder. I've heard other astrologers say this, that there are certain stats of certain births in the world and in certain countries. So there has to be, just by the law of averages, there has to be some weeks of the year that in certain areas of the world statistically would have less, maybe certain years have less births. But again, it depends on, if I was 70 or 80, I would have a much longer lifespan, and maybe I had known more people. So again, it depends on your age and how much you've traveled and how many people, how social you are and things. And of course, we've all had coworkers or friends where we didn't know. I had a lot of workers that I didn't know their birthdays. So I can't actually. Okay, one came to me now. One guy came to me that I used to work with about 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. So I'll think of him. But he, yeah, yep. So Gemini 2 people, the key here is language. Now, that's something you'll hear a lot of astrologers mention with Gemini is language. And Geminis are depending on the Gemini, the rest of the chart, depending on the Gemini, the Sun in Gemini person's Mercury, that's really important. It's important for all of us to look at our Mercury to see how we express ourselves. But for a Gemini person, that's their main planet. Mercury is incredibly important to know. Are they a Sun and Mercury in Gemini? Are they a Sun in Gemini, but they have a Taurus Mercury? That's much different than a Gemini Mercury, and if they were double air. But language comes up as a theme. Karen says, I'm born in the middle of this Gemini 2 on the 6th. That's right. I knew you were that week. I couldn't remember which day. Thank you for reminding me. That's right. You're on the 6th. Great. Happy almost birthday. That's wonderful. So the theme of language is very important for folks born this week. And language is something that's important for all the Gemini periods. But when you combine the Mercury influence of Gemini, you're welcome, the Mercury influence of Gemini with Venus, you get more, at least in my opinion, you get more fluidity with language. So Gemini 2 people, depending on your Mercury, depending on your level of education, or how much you've read, or all that coming into play as far as your intelligence and everything, will have some kind of unique, you most likely will have a unique way of expressing yourself with language, more so than other Geminis. Now, any Gemini person I've ever met in my life, or I've also talked a lot about the moons and the risings, tend to have a lot of fun with language, and with laughing and being witty and mischievous and silly, and all sorts of things, but also can be very poignant, like Gemini songwriters. there's so many people in music that have major Gemini in their charts that are very poignant and thoughtful songwriters. So that's another thing where Gemini excels at. But this concept of language is very important for you folks, for Gemini 2 folks. And the language is competitive. So the Venus influence, which is the co-ruler, relates to Libra. So Gemini is a mutable sign, but Libra is a cardinal sign. So having a little more Venus, there's that sociability of Gemini, but now the Venus gives it more oomph and can be competitive. You could be competitive with yourself. Now, this is a different kind of competitiveness than like a fire sign. Like fire signs are just naturally competitive and they kind of want to win. They like to compete and win, or, they like to get the prize or whatever. But it could be a need to impress others with your language and with your knowledge. And that competitiveness can have a dark side. So this is the very interesting thing when I've done a lot of research on the sign of Gemini, because I haven't known a lot of people born, especially this week, like I mentioned. So I don't have a lot of personal experience spending time with these kinds of folks. So I have to go off of what I've read, the celebrities, which are really, really good examples. And of course, when I look up charts and see the degrees and influences from stars, the fixed stars and things like that. But the language, the one guy I knew this week that I can think of that I worked with, he was an analyst and he was very analytical, but we would sit down at meetings and he would laugh a lot and he would try to lighten up the situation, which is something that Geminis often do. If the room is too heavy or too serious or too emotional, leave it to a Gemini to lighten things up, which works to an extent, but he would do it to a point where it would be uncomfortable and he would take a joke too far or, kind of thing. And he didn't know how to kind of bring it back. So for a man that was one of the older workers, there was something a little like almost immature, childlike about him, even though he was a very smart guy and a very good worker. So it's interesting. And he did have an interesting way of language when he would do his reports and things like that. Smashmallow says, "Hey, hello there, welcome back. Like to see some of the people that come in and out every month or two, or at least once a season. That's great. It's just amazing how fast time is going when I see different names and it's like, oh, that was in the winter or whatever. So that's great. So with all this language, yes, Gemini 2s can be a little flaky. So bear with me. That's, again, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Anybody can be flaky. But I think the flaky essence of Gemini 2 comes from the fact that a Gemini 2 person with the Venus influence has there's a more of a need rather than first Gemini. The first Gemini just has a need for activity. Here we have more of a need to be social and a little more socially competitive. So there's a little more neediness to this Gemini 2 person, which can come off as flaky if the Gemini person has decided in their excitement that they've already adopted a new job. It's like a Gemini interviewing for a job and they've already decided they want the job, even though they haven't even finished half the interview. So it's like, well, oh yeah, I'm qualified. I love this manager. Oh, I want to work here. And the manager's like, whoa, wait, we haven't even gotten to that. We haven't even gotten to that point yet. Or by dating or wanting to marry someone, maybe not having all the information, being a little impulsive and deciding, oh, I want to be with this person, or this is the type of person I want to go on a trip with. That's how the Gemini 2 possibly could come off as flaky. And again, Geminis want to be understood. Geminis, whether they're serious, and Geminis do have a serious side. That's something very important that a lot of astrologers miss, I think, is The Gemini Sagittarius polarity. So Gemini and Sag are opposite. And they're two signs that can often be jokers because you're dealing with yang energy. So Gemini is yang, or outward energy, and so is Sag, whereas Virgo and Pisces is yin energy. But Gemini and Sag can often have a hard time balancing that serious and silliness in life. When to be serious, when to be silly, when to be goofy, when you want others to take your thoughts and your ideas seriously. And with Gemini, it's not so much philosophical like it would be with Sag. It's more along the lines of something that relates to something that's close by to their local environment that Gemini wants to get across. And they want to be understood and they want their words to be heard. So that's why there's a little more of a social competitiveness there. But their words can get distorted, and this comes back to their unique language. And by unique language, I don't mean just physically how you speak, or if you have an accent because you're from another country. I don't mean that. Of course, that is a factor. We all have accents. You know, the way I speak in the East Coast here, I've had people, I knew some people from Germany once, or some people from London, and they would tell me, oh yeah, you have a such and such accent. I can hear it. Someone was saying, are you from Maine? They were trying to figure out if I was Maine, Massachusetts, that sort of thing. So they could clearly tell. But what I mean by the words getting distorted is your own language on top of how you speak and the sounds and the timbre of your voice, but more so how you do it, your tone, your pace, the words you use, sort of thing. And again, I mentioned last week that it's hard for any Gemini placement to go slow. That doesn't mean you can't be slow. You are an air sign, and air signs definitely like to look at a situation before getting too involved. So that's a good strength of an air sign, is surveying the situation before you get too mentally or emotionally involved with someone or something, which is great because some other signs don't do that. But here with the Gemini too, with the language, your words can often get distorted, and that can create frustration in your relationships because the person's not getting your message. So messages is the key. There's no other sign in the zodiac except for Gemini that's so important for the messages back and forth to be clear and to kind of hit the ones they're giving and the ones they're sending. And that's very important, I think, to Gemini, and very important to Gemini's feelings of satisfaction and happiness. And there's probably no other sign that is more flexible than Gemini. And again, that has its big pros and big cons, sort of thing. But the words getting distorted can be an issue. And what would help is awareness. So, obviously every sign has blind spots. The essence of every sign in every week has blind spots, depending on the influences from the stars and things like that. But Gemini, and again, I haven't known a lot of people this week, so I don't have a lot of tangible experience, but it would be really good to have more awareness of the impression you make or are giving to others. And part of that is Gemini just simply doesn't necessarily have the time or patience to want to look at that. So that doesn't mean you can't do it, but it might mean that you don't have the time or patience to be more aware of how you're presenting yourself to others, or how fast you're going or moving, sort of thing. And it makes me think of a couple people that we know in our family that are on the Taurus Gemini cusp, which I talked about a few weeks ago. And of course, they combine Taurus and Gemini, but they both have additional Gemini in their charts, those two people, because I looked up their charts, and they have a lot of Gemini, both of them. And one thing that both of these men do is they're kind of on. So these people that are always on, So they're always trying to impress you with some kind of joke, story. And while that can be fun for a while, after a while, the other signs, the other energies in our charts kind of say, can you give me something other, like, who are you? Like, can you share a thought or a feeling or something that's not a performance? So that, especially with men, I really see that a lot with Gemini in males. There's a lot of performance there. And is that great for acting? Yes. Is it great for theater and music and public speaking, public relations? Perfect. But not so much in the world of like personal relationships or friendships, when people don't want you to just perform all the time. You know, um, some people just learn that. I think at a young age they learn how to perform, especially if they're shy or introverted. And a lot of comics are painfully shy, but yet when they get up on stage in front of 10,000 people, they can do that sort of thing. So that's interesting. But the awareness, your impression to others, and I said this last week, the biggest lesson is to embrace quiet. Now, the moon, which on this channel, I've had people talk about, give me comments and send me messages about their moon and stuff. And what I've really noticed after a while doing this channel is I have not spent a lot of time, if any, significance on the moons. And to me, as an astrologer, the moon is one of my most favorite placements when I do a chart. I love the moon, because the moon to me gives me the bingo for the person. Especially the less I know of a person when I do a chart, the better. I don't really want to know anything, so that intellectually I'm not starting to guess or surmise things or analyzing and putting things together. I might know some very superficial information about somebody, but I like it when I don't know a lot of details about their life, because the moon and the aspects and the house is so important. So I think I'm going to try to fit either some moon videos in, or maybe once a season or something, we'll do a moon live stream, and we'll talk about just all the moons, and maybe how that relates to the transits, because that's really fun. But embrace quiet is a really huge lesson for Gemini. It's hard. Geminis often psychologically have this fear of boredom. I've seen it time and time again in dozens of people with Gemini in their chart. It's interesting. Think about it. We're all from different parents, whether it's nurture, nature. We all come from different ethnicities. We have different educational levels. Some people are world travelers, other people aren't. Some people, are high school dropout, other people are PhDs. We have all different kinds of jobs. We have all different kinds of influences growing up through prior Saturn return to 28 or 30. And yet, I see time and time again people with major Gemini with this like psychological fear of boredom. Now, it's just amazing to me. It's just amazing. Now, any sign can have a fear of boredom. We can all fear boredom. If we have too little in our lives can, kind of feel meaningless. And, too much quiet and too much downtime is not good. So a lot of people experience that during COVID. Too much quiet, weeks on end, months on end of not having enough to do at home or not work or whatever. You need to stimulation, need to, turn a light on, so to speak. But embracing quiet would be really important for Gemini 2s to do that. And if I was looking at a Gemini 2's chart, I would look at the moon and Mercury first, because the moon is your emotions, and then Mercury is your speaking and how you express yourself, in addition to that mercurial Gemini sun. So that's really important. And what's interesting about the embracing quiet is it depends on, again, any planet that you have in Gemini, it goes back to your Mercury in whatever sign. So like right now in the sky, we're going to look at the transits, Sun in Gemini, ruled by Mercury in Gemini. So that would be like someone Sun in Gemini, also ruled by Mercury in Gemini. Like I had a celebrity in mind, but I forgot who it was. But so if someone's a double Gemini, Sun and Mercury, uh, obviously I have to look at the moon too. And if those were conjunct really close to each other, wow, that would be a really powerful PowerPoint of Gemini energy. Now, what could change that is if that's involved in like a nice trine or sextiles, and then it's in a calmer, like a quieter house, like an earth house or a water house, that would change the Gemini, um, sort of that Gemini need. But oddly enough, Geminis can be often, it's like I put on a post, I put sweet or sour. I feel like sweet and sour sauce. I feel like that's Gemini too. Um, that energy can be so sweet. And when I listen to a lot of the musicians, the Gemini, fluidity and the effortlessness, it's like effortless. And then it's like just they're trying to balance out their light and their dark sides, I think. So the opposite is Sag 2, and the key is to synthesize those two energies. And of course, Sag is intuition. So again, I know I've mentioned this before, but Geminis should definitely try to increase or trust their intuition more rather than just gathering data or facts and doing that kind of Mercury calculator thing. Whereas your sister or brother, Virgo, your Mercury sister or brother, Virgo, is going to do it in a purely pragmatic way, whereas a Gemini, you may be doing it it has multi-facets. It's practical, it's versatile, it's something I can use in the future, and it's also fun. It's stimulating, sort of thing. So it's important to kind of synthesize your thought maybe with some more intuition. So you have unique communication. There's no doubt about that. And I notice people that have strong Sag or Gemini in their chart tend to have peculiar or unique ways of communicating, especially if they have stelliums, rising, Venus, Mars. It's really, really interesting. And I was talking to someone where we were saying to each other that we thought that Mars, the placement of Mars in Gemini, would possibly be number one for the most restless. If you took all the Mars signs, I think it would be probably number 1 or 2 for Mars. And the Gemini Mars people I've known, that seems to fit. I can't imagine having Mars in Gemini myself. I can't even imagine that. But not that it's a bad thing necessarily. It's just, it's just different. So another lesson is for Gemini 2, are you talking at or to someone? So you know that difference when someone's talking to you or at you. And it doesn't feel good when we're being talked at. But that's sometimes people that talk at you, it's because they have a deficit and they're neurodivergent. That's one way to look at it. They're not doing it on purpose or in an insensitive way. But if you're aware of yourself that you're talking at people because you want to get your message across rather than to people and collaborating, the ping pong of communication, then that's a good time to kind of recoil and say, all right, what do I need to do in my communication here? Because I am a Gemini and I stand for communication. It's so important to me, sort of thing. So there's a star called Cursa, which equates to riches, but can be self-seeking. That's interesting. So generally a positive star for people born this week, the degrees in the second decan, but can also be self-seeking. And there's also Rigel, which is a bold temper and possibly anxiety-ridden star. It's a very bright star. Rigel is an extremely bright star and very, very bright in every sense of the word. Bright, luminescent, bright mentally, bright, intellectually, kind of thing. And the artist formerly known as Prince Tafka, he had his Gemini conjunct to Rigel. And I believe that Prince had Sun and Mercury in Gemini. So Prince wrote thousands of songs, hundreds of which were never even released. So that gives you an indication of how he probably could never turn off his mental motor. Someone like Prince probably could never, except when he was forced to sleep. I imagine he probably didn't even sleep much. Youthful is another trait of Gemini. Yes, well, definitely, and that's a really good point. Gemini is the youth of the zodiac, and can really help others to be youthful. But I think Prince, he had that ability to kind of absorb everything in his environment and then take what he wants and, reject some things, take some things, and then just keep creating and kind of emulating other artists and creating new artists. That's another thing with Gemini too. Geminis are so good at replication. So it's if you're a Gemini too, you're a good replicator. So you can either imitate other people well, whether that be the way they work or a method they do, or you could be a good impressionist or in comedy because you could replicate their being or their voice or their facial kind of thing. Geminis are good replicators and then can produce more of those the same. Like someone like Prince, he wrote songs for and created all these little offshot groups for people. And then those people became solo people. And then those people became more stars. So it's like the Head and Shoulders and so on and so on and so on. The Head and Shoulders commercial, that's Gemini. Head and Shoulders and so on and so on and so on. So Geminis are really good at that replication kind of thing, especially Gemini 2s. All right, let's look at the transits. We have the Sun conjunct Mercury between 9 and 11. So that's what I was talking about. The Sun and Mercury in Gemini. And let's see. Okay, let's see if I can share that. Let's see. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, so there's tonight's chart, and I did it for right now it's 9:20 Eastern. I did it for 10:45 tonight. It's a little over an hour, and the reason I did that is because of this very powerful Moon Pluto aspect here, Moon opposition Pluto. So here we have Pluto at 3 degrees retrograde of Aquarius, and the Moon, which changes every month. The Moon in Leo is a very, very quick hit opposition here, but it's early. It's very early. So this is like a cusp. Aquarius, obviously, this is a cusp from Cancer going into Leo. And then, of course, this Moon will conjunct Mars in about a day, and then it will move right past. But this is very interesting. And so I keep talking about the early people that have early fixed signs, the early degrees of the fixed signs. And here would be the early Scorpios for chart tonight. And then here is the early Taurus. But there's no major Scorpio and no major Taurus right now. But early Taurus and early Scorpio planets are obviously getting these squares from this Moon Pluto. It's not involved with this Scorpio at 20. Let's see here. The Sun is almost sextile the Moon. That will be very soon. And will also sextile Mercury, which is nice. And the Moon will trine Venus and conjunct Mars before it goes into Virgo. And then, of course, we have this Aries energy here too. But the Moon opposition Pluto that's one of the strongest aspects for the Moon. And the two most difficult aspects for the moon are the moon opposition Pluto and the moon square Pluto. So this one, which is opposition, this is indicating the moon in Leo, which is about the self, opposition Pluto in Aquarius, which is the powerful collective. So anytime, and we'll be talking about that when we get into the summer of Leo, the ego, the self versus the collective, and that kind of balance. But generally speaking, someone that has the moon opposition Pluto in their chart, those are very intense emotions, and it's played out in scenarios with others. So a baby born tonight, he or she will have this aspect, and many people do, will learn a lot of emotional lessons through others, and sometimes they're not always fun. Anything that touches Pluto can be powerful and positive, or it can be painful. There's a lot of P words there, but moon Pluto, that's always. And then the moon, if this were square Pluto, if the moon were square Pluto, it would be similar intensity, but it would be more tense and it would be more inner. So the moon Pluto person would have more lessons with the moon and Pluto. It would be with others, but it would be more so with themselves about their own drives and habits, because that's what the moon relates to. But I wanted to bring that up because that's very interesting, because with this Pluto retrograde, I notice all astrologers around the world, every month or so, or every season, they're always cherry picking these aspects that are hitting the retrograde Pluto, and then, putting it into an event chart, putting it into like Trump or Biden's chart, or someone's chart, or a celebrity's chart that's living, that's going through changes. That's another thing I like to do lately, is I like to watch current interviews of people that are older. So people that are in the 50s, 60s, 70s that are still relevant in celebrityhood, and they're being interviewed. It's kind of good to look at their Pluto and their Saturn and see if they're coming back after a while of kind of semi-retirement or something from their craft, to see what might be hitting them. But that this is Aldebaran. I think I might have mentioned that last year. These degrees of Gemini is Aldebaran, and that can create high energy, but also quarrels. So again, it's high. The way I look at it is this: the Gemini energy is it's kind of like a race car driver, and again, I don't have any planets in Gemini, so I probably did in a past life, and I already did my Gemini work. But when I see certain people, and this is what's interesting too, is the age doesn't even really matter, especially with the mental quickness and acuity. Whether I see someone that's 25 with major Gemini, or 50 or 60 with major Gemini, it's amazing to me how that Gemini, wherever it is in the chart, that Gemini has to move and it has to activate. Has to. Now, even if the Gemini 2 person, even if their Mercury's in Taurus, which is a little more introverted and more reserved, and let's say their Sun or Mercury, let's say those planets were in a water house or an earth house, it would dampen it a little bit. It would quiet it and dampen all that air, that high-speed whirlwind air energy a little bit. It would focus it in a quieter way. So that might mean the Gemini's intimates might see more of that quality than the Gemini 2's coworkers, or more kind of, random or superficial acquaintances might not see all that air energy as dominant, for you. But here's another thing. Tonight we have Pluto in the first house. So any baby born with Pluto in the first house, that is pure power. That person is destined to make a mark on the world, because their first house is personality, and it's transformed by Pluto. So that's incredibly, incredibly strong. Although this person, this baby that grows up, will have Pluto in the first, will be able to exercise personal power. However, it's retrograde, so it won't be as easy for the person, especially with the moon opposition Pluto aspect. So there's things a person will have to integrate before they can express that power, so to speak. But another thing is, I think I mentioned this, here we have Pisces intercepted, the nodes in Pisces, hardly any Pisces, no Cancer but Jupiter is going to go in Cancer very soon. Jupiter's coming to Cancer, no Scorpio. So Cancer folks, if you know anybody that's a moon child coming up, or moon in Cancer folks, Cancer rising especially, that Jupiter is the benevolent Jupiter is going to touch the, at least initially, the early Cancer people. So we'll be talking about that in a month when we get to Gemini Cancer cusp. And then right around June 24th or 25th, as we'll start getting into those early degrees of Cancer off the cusp, we'll get into Cancer 1. And then Jupiter will conjunct the Sun. So that will just enhance anything that the Cancerian person might be doing. It could, if they have positive habits, it could enhance that. If it's negative, it could also enhance that. But that's a really good thing. And that's also good for the other water signs as well. So Jupiter is going to go into Cancer. It's going to trine the early Pisces people and early Scorpio. So we've had Jupiter in Gemini for a while, and it's been trining all the air signs. So you air signs, you're going to have to take a little break now and let the water signs, let Jupiter shine its light on the early water sign planets. And that's also good, especially if someone has like an early Mars water, early rising water. Oh, that's really nice if it hits your ascendant and it's a trine, a conjunct or a trine. That will be very nice. But look at all this all this Gemini right here. The Gemini is just dominating. The water is so low. We don't even have a lot of earth. I have a good deal of fire, but the earth and water. So the yang energy in the cosmic sky right now is really dominating. So this is a really good time for all of us to be active. And if we're someone that's inclined to not be as active, if we're more of a homebody or more introverted, all this Gemini energy is a good oomph. And like youthful is another trait of Gemini. That's another gift of Gemini, is youthfulness, because we're living in a dense, heavy, thick world. And, as we all age, life takes shots at us, whether it's literal or, whatever. And sometimes parts of our spirit gets wounded, parts of our spirit gets pegged, or our armor gets. So it is good as we mature and keep learning. It is good to be youthful, especially with your mind. And the more youthful you are, the older you get, the more you're most likely going to have your mind. That and eating blueberries. I think most people know that, but I think I've read that blueberry has one of the highest antioxidant scores for your body, for your brain as you age. So eat organic blueberries. They are so good. But yeah, all that Gemini energy. And of course, this is another thing. I feel like a lot of times when I mention a lot of the signs, I feel like I neglect Libra. I don't know why that is, and I don't mean to do that for the Libra folks, but there doesn't tend to be a lot of Libra energy, right? And the transits, obviously, that's not going to be until the fall, late September. We're going to go into Libra, and I remember saying that a year ago. And how is that a year ago already? But yeah, so the early Libras are getting the trine, and now that we're moving closer to the middle of Gemini, the middle Libras are getting a trine, and Jupiter has been trining Libras all along, up until right now, up until late Libras that are almost early Scorpio. So even though there's no transiting Libra, Libras are still getting some trines here, which is good. So Libras are on the side getting a little trine and kind of biding their time until late September, early October. But the Jupiter in Cancer is what I see most astrologers talking about right now. And it's quite different than Gemini. Jupiter enhancing Gemini, which is communication. And with Cancer, it's going to be all about feelings and roots kind of thing. But we'll have to see as it goes. You have to see which house it goes into. And then, of course, you have to find, when Jupiter goes in Cancer, you have to find out where Cancer, what house cusp do you have Cancer on. In my chart, it's on the 8th. It's on the 8th house, which is a very deep house. So as Jupiter progresses into Cancer, it will hit the cusp of my 7th and 8th house, and then it will go into the middle of my 8th. So that will be interesting. It's very deep. And eighth house, the 8th house transits tend to be very much highlighted by a lot of astrologers, more so than other houses, just because it's the Scorpio house. But it's not Scorpio per se, but it's the Pluto house. It's because it's Scorpio's house, it's ruled by Pluto, and it has to do with intensity through others, which is interesting. So that's always an interesting thing. Like right now, it's Virgo is intercepted there. So we're going to be talking a lot more about Cancer coming up, and we'll talk about Gemini, last Gemini, next week. All right, so let's go through the celebrities. All right, so we have hold on one second. Stage. Okay, let's remove that. Okay, so these are all musicians. So I had Prince. I know I mention Prince every time in my videos and every year, Tafka. Prince is probably one of the best examples of a Gemini 2, at least from what I can tell. And he was such a complicated person in his, when you hear people talk about interviews with him and talk about knowing him, he was sweet, he was sour, he was sensitive, he was controlling, all sorts of duality, which is typical of Gemini 2. Kenny G, some people think his music is cheesy, but his music has a certain, his saxophone has a very distinct language. When it comes on the radio, there's no other person, it's Kenny G. There's a lot of other jazz saxophonists that I hear, and their notes and their chords, I can't tell them apart because their styles are so similar. But Kenny G has his own jazz language. Richard Butler is from the Psychedelic Furs. He's a very interesting, quirky singer, very much has his own language. Brian McKnight is a balladeer, R&B soul from the 90s and late 80s, 2000s. Really, really, really excellent, poignant songwriter. Tony Levin is a bassist that worked with Peter Gabriel, a British bassist who has a very, very unique way of playing. Again, it's kind of his own language. Jimmy Jam, one of my favorite producers, Jam and Lewis, who produced the SOS Band, Janet Jackson, New Edition, all sorts of bands in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And they were under the tutelage of Prince in the late 70s and early 80s. And Jimmy got fired by Prince because Jimmy was considered not a perfectionist. Prince said, "You're not enough of a perfectionist." And so 2 Geminis born in the same week, especially the same sex, I can't imagine 2 Gemini 2s working together in a friendship or work environment of the same sex and that lasting too long. That's an absolute, that's just like an explosion waiting to happen, I think. Steve Vai, one of the best progressive rock guitarists, extremely fluid. Nick Rhodes is the keyboardist of the British group Duran Duran. Again, has a very, very interesting ambient kind of nature to his music. Pete Byrne, another British musician. We have Eddie London, that's a more obscure, I think another British musician. And that's it. So we have all those people. And I did want to mention too with Prince, Prince was also an actor. So we could consider, even though I always talk about Prince as a musician, but he was an actor as well, in Purple Rain. And he had that other movie too. He might have had like a small part. So again, the versatility of Gemini, all Gemini people, but Gemini 2 people with the Venus, obviously that works really, really well for music. So before we go, let's see. So I wanted to, so one person I forgot to put on this list is Dana Carvey. So those of you that have watched SNL from decades ago, Saturday Night Live, or movies, will know Dana Carvey, the comedian actor. And I was talking about Dana with a couple of people within the last month. So it made me think of when his birthday is. And he's June 2nd, 1955. So he's right in line with this week coming up. Now, this is his actual chart. I checked the time and online, and this looks like the exact, looks like the correct degrees. But so I mentioned before how Gemini 2s, you are good. Geminis are just great imitators in general, and or replicators, mimic, imitate. That's something that all the mutable signs can do, because the mutable signs synthesize others' energy. And I've been mentioning over the weeks on how I think it's really valuable to have mutable signs in your birth chart. I think as an astrologer, I think it's most important to not be missing mutable signs. So I know some people in my family and friends circle, I know their charts where they do not have major mutable. And I can absolutely tell you objectively that it's not always easy for them to adapt to situations or other people's actions or point of view. So when you have mutable signs, now you can take that too far and you can be unreliable. But generally speaking, it's really, really good to have that ability to tune into other people. And all 4 mutable signs, it's very valuable. So let's look at Dana's chart. Now we could look at, I think he's a musician too. I'm not 100% sure. But so he was born in 55. So he was a Pluto in Leo, Uranus in Cancer, Jupiter Cancer. We're just talking about that. And Neptune retrograde in Libra, and a retrograde Saturn in Scorpio. So what's interesting to me is, now he was extremely Geminian and Mercurial, where he could play. He did Bush, he did the President Bush. He did all sorts of very specific, odd characters that he would imitate, like someone in life that he knew, like an acquaintance or a friend, and then he would bring that to a character, and he would make this brand new character with his language. If you look at the way Dana speaks and what he does with his mouth, it's pure. It's his own unique communication and language. And the fact that he was a Sun at 11 and Mercury in Gemini. Now this Mercury is close to Cancer. See how close that is? That's very, very close to Cancer, which would indicate he's more sensitive behind the scenes than he gives off, especially with a Mars in Cancer. He is absolutely more emotional than his mercurial ways would suggest. But his Venus is in Taurus. So that's interesting, because the Venus in Taurus kind of grounds the whole chart. And that's not retrograde either. And it's right in the middle of Taurus. I like that a lot for him. I like that a lot. I think that's why he's such a solid comedian. He's so tried and true. He's versatile, but he's always been there doing these characters, and he's been able to just nail it. So I think that really that helps Gemini, all this Gemini energy. Now, immediately with all Gemini, if this was your chart and I was looking at your chart, I would look, okay, are there any additional air? Well, Neptune is generational. That doesn't really count. And here's Aquarius. Yay, Dana, funniest man alive. Yeah, I agree. He's literally one of the funniest ever. He's one of my favorites. Absolutely. He's in my top 5 of all time. Yep. With Chevy Chase. But Dana's up there. Just what what he does with his body, and it's just amazing. But that's not major Aquarius. That's an outer kind of asteroid. So no major Aquarius other than it being on his 6th house of daily routine. So with this air here, he didn't have a ton of additional air. So you have to think of if you have trouble focusing your energy at times, right? Because you flip from one thing to another, you have to think of, okay, where do I want to put my energy next? Well, he had the tenacious Mars in Cancer, and he had a Taurus planet here, and he did not have additional air, which would have made him even more of an airhead. So he was able to, I think he was able to tune into his information and be kind of methodical in a way, and not seeking more thrill or more excitement outside of what he was doing. And that's why he was able to stick with it. Although he does have a lot of 3rd house here. But look at this. This is so different from Gemini. We have the moon conjunct Saturn in Scorpio. Whoa. So this is not a light man. So he plays lighthearted characters, and he does it in a very disarming, comic way. But who he is in real life is not, that man is not light. And that man is focused. He has unbelievable concentration and focus for a Gemini. And that's why he's able to do those characters. He would probably do those characters 1,000 times in the mirror until he got it. And conjunct Saturn, I mean, he's not going to give up. Saturn gives discipline. So that's really, really interesting. So that's why it's so cool. It's so cool to look at when you get a sense of an element in your chart. If you have another planet in the same element as your sun sign. So if you're an air sign, tonight we're talking about Gemini, and Karen's going to have her birthday soon. Do you have other planets in air that feeds it? Is it a trine? Does it feed an aspect or a configuration? Does it hit anything with the ascendant or the 10th house up here? Here's another thing. His 10th house is Gemini. So here's almost, now he doesn't have any real Sag here, except this node. But these are opposites here, and then the Taurus and the Scorpio are opposites. So he's dealing with a little bit of push-pull with these strong polarities here. So I don't think it's easy being Dana Carvey. It is not easy being him, because on any given day, he's either light or dark. I don't think there's any in between for him. And depending on what's going on in his personal life, it's hard for him to moderate that. And that's why comedy is so good for him. And it's probably so therapeutic for so many comedians that may be troubled, right? They may have emotional troubles or traumas from childhood, unresolved hurts and things, where they can put that kind of, loose, unhealed energy or crazy energy into, put that into something like SNL, where they had to train all week and rehearse all week. So that must be very cathartic for him. And especially this sun here, it's right near this arrow. So that's very much, he's very much a power person in the public. He has a very powerful persona because he's able to influence others with his Gemini charm, his Gemini wit, his Gemini powers of persuasion. He has all that, not just in his characters, but he has that as a person. So he's able to, he could sell anything to anybody in the public. Like you or I might not be able to do that because we don't have this configuration, but he could with Sun, Mercury, and Gemini, and right on the ascendant on the 10th house. Wow, amazing, amazing wit and charm. And I like the fact that his Venus is nicely placed. I mean, that gives him some likability, gives him some natural charm, sort of thing. Pluto in the 12th, that's interesting. I'll have to look at this deeper. But that's just someone that is born, that is a Gemini too. And I think I'm going to try to do more of this. If you guys and gals want to see more specific examples, instead of me just mentioning a celebrity, I'll try to put, so we can put puzzle pieces together to try to figure out, kind of how these things work. But what's interesting is someone like Dana's he's going to hit the big 70 next week. He's going to hit, which he doesn't look at. Geminis are often frequently youthful. He does not look at all. And Sun, Mercury, and the 10th house Gemini, all ruled by Mercury and Gemini. So he's always been youthful, but he's turning 70, and Saturn in Aries will just form an inconjunct to his Saturn in the next 2 years. So if he continues in his 70s, if he continues in his career, he's just going to need to make some adjustment with Saturn Aries. He's going to have to make adjustment to what he does with his craft, because he just had a Saturn trine years ago. He had the Saturn trine to his Saturn in Scorpio from Pisces. So that's nice and easy, sort of, especially for someone that's already lived and gone through a lot, someone in their 60s. So it's interesting that he's closing the 60s and he'll have that kind of thing. But that was just another example, and I will probably continue to do more of that in the future. But thank you so much for tuning in. I know tonight was a light night. We had like 2 or 3 people popping in and out. I appreciate it. Again, a reminder, the live streams are here on YouTube Fridays or Saturdays. For now, because of my schedule, if you want to make a note in your plan, a calendar, or your phone, I'm probably going to be doing these live streams closer to 9 because I'm busier and I need more of the evening to get things done. My daughter had a dance rehearsal tonight, which took all evening, and then she has a marathon day of her recital dances tomorrow. She's in shows all day. So she's going, tomorrow will be almost 12-hour day for her. So most likely my live streams will be closer, either 8:30 like we did tonight or 9 Eastern time. So please make a note of that, and I appreciate it. Carolyn says, great presentation. Thanks. You're very welcome. And, Gemini is, I was speaking with an astrologer last week. Gemini is hard for me. Gemini is hard for me to present. Not because I think Gemini is difficult, but because Gemini to me is very intangible, right? It's Gemini's the twins and it's air. And I haven't known a lot of Geminis in my life. When we get to the Gemini 3, I'm trying to think, I think that might be another week I haven't known a lot of people. So in general, aside from when I was very, very young, knew some Gemini kids, I have not known many Gemini people. So Gemini is definitely, this has been difficult for me. It's taken extra research and some meditation to tune into Gemini too. So let's wish Karen a happy birthday next week. I wish you a happy birthday, Karen, and the best of health as well. Nothing more important than health. And wish that to you for your solar return. And please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. I really appreciate it. Share it with your family and friends. And we'll see you next week for another Gemini. Thank you so much. Have a great week.